Margaret, I got a few questions I want to ask you. First of all, I'd like to start with in your vocation as a palliative care physician and as somebody who trained others in palliative care. I know that you're passionate about seeking the ways that we can best care for people who are suffering or people who are dying. You've spoken before about trends that you see in Western medicine, Western society, that are troubling to you. These are trends in the approach they take to caring for the suffering and caring for those folks who are nearing end of life.
Yeah.
Could you just briefly summarize what those trends are and what you think about them, Margaret?
Well, brevity is not my strong suit, but I'll do my best to highlight some of the things that I think are most troubling for our society, and particularly most troubling for those of us who are Christian believers. And I think there are many, many good reasons, even if you are not a person of any particular faith, to be troubled by and be grieved by the trends that have been happening in Western society, really over the last 50 years especially, but we've been on a real slide for probably the last 5 or 10 years. And especially here in Canada, which is a little bit interesting because we seem to value our individual freedom and just caring for each other. One of the really important things that you ask somebody, well, what does it mean to be a Canadian? And after they say, well, we're not Americans, then what they say is we take care of each other. We have a universal healthcare system. We have a social safety net. We don't care as much about standing in line so that other people can have a turn too. We're polite. All of these things really at the base of them have a base of kindness. They have a basis in a worldview, if you will, a set of ethics, a set of core beliefs where we care for one another. And Jesus said that greater love has no person than this, that you lay down your life for your friends. And that has been the foundation, whether or not we acknowledge it today, of our Canadian culture. And we've done hard things. I like to say we learned how to fish in the North Atlantic and farm on the prairies, for heaven's sakes. We know how to do hard things. We can figure out how to care for each other. But what has happened that has been really troubling, and to those of us who have worked a long time in caring for people at the end of life or in difficult circumstances, we have, the biggest thing we have experienced through this is actually grief. We have felt like, wow, we spent all these years working on trying to make it better for people at that time and their families and their communities. And all of a sudden it's just like, oh, well, never mind. If you're really suffering that much, we'll just give you an injection. It'll be all over and nobody has to worry about it. And it's just like we feel like we've been kicked in the stomach over this, because all of this richness and amazing community building, this weaving together of this love that is so amazing, is just like gone like that. And it's beyond just, well, you don't have to do it if you don't want to. It's like, if you don't believe this, if you aren't willing to be part of this, if you are not willing to refer, and if you're not willing to even say this is a good thing, this is a societal good, then you're just a religious bigot. And that is just opposite. It's wrong. The way we show we are human beings is that we care for each other. No other animals do that the same way we do. There was a big to-do a few years ago about this mother whale who lost her calf out here in the Straits of Juan de Fuca, and she spent days kind of holding the calf that had already died up to the surface. And everybody thought this was just amazing. And yet, there we are saying, oh, well, if you're suffering, we'll just kill you. What is wrong with us? That we're not understanding that how we care for each other when it's hard is what makes us human beings. And that is what is a human being anyway? That's the deal with this. It is, we have to have a deep understanding of what it really means to be a human being. So if you think that you're just a bunch of cells and that after you die, nothing happens, you're just gone, you're just here for that short time, and that there's absolutely nothing good that can come out of a situation where you're suffering, then it doesn't make any sense to hang around. It doesn't make any sense to go through anything. If, when you're not beautiful, when you're not useful, when you're not having fun anymore, you might as well just check out, because it'll be better for you, it'll be better for those around you. And we know that's a lie, because every 4 years we have the Olympics. Look at all the things, all the suffering that those athletes go through in order to, as Paul says, win a corruptible crown, win a crown that doesn't satisfy, doesn't stick around, isn't eternal. And yet, in the same breath, the media, who are really just glorifying these kinds of pursuits, will say, well, it's not really worth anything if you care for your dying mother or your dying spouse, or why would you not want to just give somebody a lethal injection who wants it? There's a total disconnect there, that you can't have it both ways. You can't really think that each individual is important and has inherent dignity and all of those things, and then say, oh yeah, but if you want to die, we'll make sure that it happens. Before all of this happened, when someone would say to us, I just really wish I were dead, what we did was we took that as an invitation to move in closer, to really come alongside this person, to become passionate, to suffer with the person, to say, okay, tell me what's the worst thing about this. This is a question I use quite often when I'm speaking with patients or family members. What's the worst part about this? If you had a magic wand and you could change one thing, what would it be? What can we do to help you do what we call reframe hope? So maybe hope isn't that you're going to live to be 95 anymore, but maybe it is that you're going to be able to attend your granddaughter's wedding, or see a grandchild born, or if you're a young mom with cancer, that you're going to have the energy and the resources to record some things for your children before you die, or you're going to be able to leave some other kind of legacy. What is it that brings you hope? What brings you joy? Instead of just saying, when the person says, I don't think my life is worth living, saying, well, maybe you're right. It probably isn't. And there's a Dutch person, I think, or a Belgian, who once said, euthanasia kills the patient twice. The first time, when the person says, I really want to be dead, my life has no meaning, and we say, yeah, you're right, you qualify. You don't have any meaning. And the second time, when you do it. And I think that's worth thinking about, because why do we put all these resources and efforts into suicide prevention if, on the other hand, we're saying, well, in some cases, it's a good idea. It's understandable. And that doesn't mean that I don't understand how someone who has a really terrible crippling disease like amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, also known as Lou Gehrig's disease, or other things where you feel like a lot is being taken from you. I understand that it's a tempting thought to have, but we don't live and die in a vacuum. How I experience my illness, how I experience what's happening to me is experienced by my whole community. And I need to, Dr. Hui out at Regent College has a really lovely paper he wrote at one point about the duty to be cared for. Not only do we have a duty to care, but when we need the care, we have a duty to allow others to care for us. Because if everybody only has the duty to care, then who's going to get that care? We have a duty as Christians, as human beings, to allow others to care for us. And there's this whole idea about autonomy, which is is not only deceptive, but it's false. So this, and I think what I would say, one of the things I like to say is that autonomy has a lot of glitter to it, but it's like a plastic Cracker Jack toy, if you're old enough to remember Cracker Jacks. Anyway, it's this plastic dollar store gold crown type stuff, or money or whatever. It's just, it's glittery, and it maybe even looks pretty authentic, but it's fake. It doesn't last. The gold that we get, that's gold refined in the fire that scripture talks about, is what you get in the furnace. You get it when you have cared for somebody, even when it's hard. And we understand this. The people who we're closest to are the folks that we went through medical school with. We were in the trenches with them. We went through med school when my husband and I, when it was not as nice as it is now. And there was a lot of on-call and a lot of hard work and a lot of very punitive type teaching, and it wasn't very pleasant. And so you were really like you were in the trenches. And I think people who've been in the military, or who have, I'm sure the nurses and doctors who have gone through this COVID stuff together will be feeling the same way, or essential workers at the grocery store. There will be this sense that we have been in the trenches together, and we did this, we fought it, and we did well. And I think in some ways, you have 4 children, you and your wife are feeling that too. I'm sure that when you finally get them to start sleeping through the night and doing these things, we did it. We survived it. But there's a closeness that you get. There's a sense that I have cared for this other individual. I've cared for this child. I've cared for this parent in a way that has eternal consequences. It's eternally important that I showed that this person is made in the image of God, that imago Dei, that he or she has inherent dignity. This idea about dignity is a word that's been co-opted by the other side of this, and saying, oh, well, I want to die with dignity. Well, if you're not feeling dignified, dignity is something that you have. It is yours because you were made in the image of God. But if you're not feeling dignified, that is less your problem than it is our problem. We need to be able to come alongside you somehow to make it so that you see that you are worth something to us. You don't have to be beautiful. You don't have to be useful. You don't have to smell good. You don't have to control your bowels. You don't have to do any of that. You don't even have to be able to speak to us or look at us or be conscious. We are privileged to care for you because you are a child of God made in his image. And that's the kind of gold that we want to have. Paul says at the end of 1 Corinthians 12 that he's talking about gifts and everything. And he says, and now I will show you the most excellent way. And the most excellent way is the way of love. It's not about rights. Ian Benson once said, when he and I were on a TV program together, he once said, rights are an admission that love has failed. Rights are an admission that love has failed. If all of us did what Paul adjured us to do in Philippians 2, to put the needs of others ahead of our own needs, and what Jesus asked us to do as well, and what he did for us, then I wouldn't have to worry about my rights, because everybody else would be putting my needs ahead of their own needs. We do need rights, because not everybody's going to do that. We live in a fallen world. We live in a difficult society. So we need to have those rights in order to protect people who are vulnerable. But I think we need to celebrate them a little less, because it is an admission that we're not loving in the deepest possible way. So one of the things that comes out of this is that if you think about euthanasia, and I just about refuse to call it MAID unless I have to in a setting, because medical assistance in dying is what we've been doing in palliative care, and physicians, Hippocratic physicians, have been doing for 2,400 years without killing people. So it's a euphemism, it's a lie. Euthanasia is when a doctor or a nurse practitioner gives a lethal injection or some other form of actually causing the death of the patient. Assisted suicide is when the means are provided and the person has some agency in it of some sort. In Canada, almost all of the hastened deaths are euthanasia deaths. Very, very few are assisted suicide. And this is actually kind of important because in the jurisdictions where only assisted suicide has become legal, the death rates have gone up a little bit, but for the most part, it has stayed at 0.2 to 0.3% of deaths. And that would be in Oregon and Washington. Oregon's had it for over 20 years. And they're still below, well below even, not even 0.5% of deaths. In Canada, we've had it now for, we're coming up to 4 years, and we are beyond 2% in 4 years. And in Belgium and the Netherlands, it's even higher because they've had it for longer. So the idea, if there are people that are in jurisdictions where they're thinking about this, I would say fight really hard. If you're going to lose it, don't allow euthanasia, because it becomes sanitized. It becomes just another medical procedure. And, oh, well, I don't have anything to do with it. The doctor's just going to come and I'm going to fall asleep and all of this, where it's not like you have to take a pill. Or one person I know feels that everything should always be only assisted suicide. And even if you're completely disabled, that you should have to blink your eyes to start a mechanism or something like that, so that you understand that you are the agent that is starting this, and it's not doing that. And going along with that, so is this idea that, well, this is an autonomous thing. And it's not autonomous. I've started doing a little demonstration when I give talks about how non-autonomous this really is, where I get one person to stand up and represent the patient, and then I get a whole lot of other people standing up there, somebody to represent the nurses, somebody to represent the doctors, the funeral directors, the ward clerks, the social workers, the clergy, the people who are making the laws, the neighbors, the rest of the family members, the pharmacists, all these folks that are involved. And you have this gigantic number of people standing up there. And if somebody has a suicide, it doesn't make us happy. And we do think about, well, what could I have done if they take too many pills or use a firearm or something? And it's, oh, this is horrible. And we know that that affects so many people around that individual, even if they had no agency whatsoever in being involved. But not only is this person bringing all these people into this, each of those people that is standing up there represents a whole team of people. So all the doctors, all the nurses, all the people in the pharmacy, all the people that work at the funeral home. And in some way, they are being complicit in this type of a death and participating in it. Even, and the pharmacists, for example, they lose their license if they don't dispense the drugs. There are, care aides and, people that run nursing homes, all these people, journalists, the list goes on and on. About people who are involved. And behind all those people who are involved is another group of people who are pushing people to be involved. You've probably heard about the hospice out in Delta, that was the one hospice in all of Fraser Health with 10 little beds that they made themselves, and the offered to do more than 50% of their own funding. They're a block away from the Delta Hospital who performs euthanasia, and the government has just completely pulled their license and their funding after a year because they refused to allow euthanasia on the premises. This idea that somehow, oh, well, if you don't have to be involved, but if you don't want to do it, then that's fine, but just let us have what we want. There's an underlying, and I mean this sincerely, there's an underlying selfishness in that does not take into account the effects that this is going to have on our whole society. What does it mean to people living in the disabled community when, okay, if you can't control your bowels or your bladder anymore, that means that you qualify for euthanasia? If you have a disability that you think is causing intolerable suffering, you qualify for euthanasia. And now we're talking about opening it up for quote unquote mature minors, which is children. And in fact, the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto already has their protocols that they've had in place, even though it's not legal yet. They're talking about opening it up for purely psychiatric reasons, psychological reasons. And they're also saying, well, we need to have it for people by advance directive. So if I get to the place where I say I don't recognize my children, then I want to have a lethal injection. I don't want to have anybody caring for me. I don't want to live when I get past that. And there was a famous case recently in Europe where the woman had said that, but after she got a bit demented, the doctor tried sedating her through giving her a sedative in her coffee. That didn't work. And so she asked the family, and the family helped to hold this person down while the doctor injected the lethal injection. Now, how opposite is that to this idea of coming alongside and caring and being there? And the grief that those of us who have done this kind of work are experiencing is so profound that all of this is being just completely turned around backwards. That somehow those of us who want to get in there and be with people and find out what the difficulty is and just lean into that mystery of what happens when someone's dying and when they're frightened, and that, well, you're the one. I've actually had people say to me, well, you only want that because you enjoy watching people suffer. Now, what kind of a person does it take to say that to someone who's been a palliative care doctor for 30 years? Anybody who has been at the bedside of someone who is making that transition to the next life, there's something beautiful and mysterious. It's akin in many ways to a birth. We don't have control over it completely. We're just there as people who bear witness and who accompany. And one of my favorite books on the subject is by a Catholic physician named Sheila Cassidy. It's called Sharing the Darkness. And my Buddhist friends like it. Everybody seems to like it. Dr. Cassidy is a very interesting person, but she has a couple of beautiful images from her book. And one is called the Stabat Mater, which means the mother stands. And she's talking about Mary standing at the foot of the cross, watching and bearing witness with Jesus. And what she was able to do, she couldn't moisten lips. She couldn't sing to him. She couldn't touch him. She couldn't say comforting words to him. All she could do was stand there and look and watch and be with him, to accompany him and be radically present with him, which is kind of an interesting thing when you think about Emmanuel, God with us, and then his mother being with him. There's some beautiful symmetry in that. But Dr. Cassidy says, when we are with someone who is dying, even if they don't want to have a lot of pain medication and they're at a place where they are experiencing some suffering, and we're watching that just being there is not nothing. That bearing witness, accompanying, being radically present is one of the greatest gifts we can give to each other. Not trying to explain it away, not trying to make it all better, not trying to fix it, which I'm guilty of, any of those things. It just being radically present is an amazing gift. It's so grace-filled. And the other image she has is of Mary, Martha's sister, and with her alabaster jar of precious spikenard, and how she pours this out over Jesus' feet. Dr. Cassidy says that this extravagance of caring, this went up as this aroma that nobody could mistake. There was this, it's a very pungent aroma that went up, and it said this person was worth it. That this extravagance of caring, he's going to die soon, but this is my dowry. I'm pouring it out. And Dr. Cassidy says, when we care like that extravagantly for people who are not going to get better, people who can't give back to us, people who may not give to the society in any other way than allowing themselves to be cared for, then we send up that aroma again, that aroma of Christ. And Dr. Williams, Sarah Williams, gave a talk to our Christian Medical and Dental Association meeting last year, and she talked about how our society can shut down our words, but they can't shut down the aroma. You know, that you're caring for me in a way that I'm not expecting. What is that aroma that I smell? You know, what is it about you? And that no matter, even if we have duct tape across our mouths, we can still do that kind of caring, and that it goes up just as Mary's did, as a pleasing sacrifice to the Lord, and a witness to everybody around us that every single person has a life worth living and a life worth being cared for, even when it's hard, maybe even especially when it's hard.
You advocate for something that views pain differently as total pain, and then views care differently as, maybe I could call it, total care.
Yeah.
Could you speak to that a little bit, Margaret?
Sure. I think the catchword is whole person care that people will use. The interesting thing about total pain is that it was a construct that was elucidated and promoted by Dr. Cicely Saunders, who is the founder of the modern hospice movement. She was first, I think, a social worker and then a nurse, and people weren't paying attention to her, so she went back in her 40s and became a physician in Britain. And she founded St. Christopher's Hospice, which is the first modern hospice in the world, and it's out in the suburbs of London. And I actually had an opportunity in the 1990s to visit the hospice and met Dr. Saunders before she passed away. She was still doing rounds and doing things. It's a very interesting story and quite integrated. But her idea was that it isn't just physical pain that we have, but we also have psychological pain. So things that are happening with how we think about ourselves and what's going on in our heads, maybe even our own chemicals that are happening. We have social pain with our families and our communities, what's happening there. And we have spiritual pain. And these different types of pain overlap like a Venn diagram, sort of. And you can have areas where the total pain overlaps. And it's very hard to get any one of them under control without addressing all of them. And one example that I use quite often was a patient that I cared for a long time ago, who was a young woman who had a very bad gynecological cancer. And we had a very hard time getting her pain under control. And finally, she confessed to someone that she felt that the reason that she was having all this pelvic pain was because she had lived what she termed a promiscuous lifestyle, and that God was punishing her because of that. So we talked to her, we got the chaplain and her pastor in to talk to her and said, that's not the way God works. And she had quite a bit of peace after that, but we still couldn't get her pain completely under control. And I felt like there was something that was still there. And she kind of went along, and finally she said, well, there is something. Do you really want to know? And I said, yes, I really want to know. And she said to me, well, I'm just worried that after I die, nobody's going to be able to cash in my Club Z points. Now, Club Z points were reward points from a store called Zellers, which is kind of like a Walmart that has gone out of business now. But I looked at her and I just said, your Club Z points? And I didn't know what else to say. I didn't laugh or anything, but this is the biggest concern when you're dying, is that nobody's going to cash in your Club Z points. So she said, yes, I've been saving for 2 years to get a bicycle for my little boy. And I'm just afraid that when I die, all those points are going to go to waste. Well, as I say, we don't get to do very many miracles in palliative care, but we took some money from the Palliative Care Foundation and we used her Club Z points, and her little fellow was riding his bike up and down the halls at the palliative care unit within about 24 hours. And we got this young woman's pain under control completely with half the dose of the medication that we needed before. So there, all of these things, her spiritual, her familial, how her brain was working, her, all of this contributed to her physical pain. I think people do understand in the regular medical system, there's what they call the biopsychosocial model. So they understand that you have this psychological components to pain and social components to pain. But the spiritual component is, they're a little wary of that. So that's one way that I think we do lead the way in palliative care, and trying to work. It's part of the reason why we work as a team. And that's been one of the difficulties in the time of COVID, is it's been hard to work as a team because of physical distancing and wearing masks and not being able to do home visits and all of these different things. We are usually will, as our team, when I work in home care, we'll have maybe have lunch together even, and the social worker and our administrator and our nurse clinician and I and maybe one of the nurses who's dealing with somebody at home, we'll have like a little mini conference about, well, what could we do, and thinking about what are some of the things that would really help this person. Well, I think it'd be great if you could come out to make a visit, or the social worker has something to offer, or whatever, the chaplain has something to offer, or we can make a contact with the person's family doctor or the person's faith community. But all of that, we're all in our own little silos, and it's that's made it really hard. The other thing that with home that's been particularly difficult in this time is that we've been able to have the hospital, the palliative care unit at the hospital, and the hospices as kind of a backup. So if somebody is in a pain crisis, we could say, well, let's get you to the hospital, get it sorted out, then come home. But with COVID, you couldn't, unless you had a recent COVID test, you couldn't go to the palliative care unit. And even when you were there, you could only have visitors. We had a better visiting policy than the rest of the hospital, but you could only go for a short time, only one visitor. And so, and the same thing at the hospices. Well, we didn't want to bring COVID into those settings. That would be awful. But if you've got a loved one who is not too bad during the day, but then gets really agitated at night, for example, and you're having a hard time getting those symptoms under control, usually we just say, well, let's just get you in for a couple days and figure this out. That person's going to be completely alone. One of the things we do is we see the family as the unit of care, and however the person defines family. I like the Hawaiian word ohana, which means just like how you define your family, this bigger group. And so usually what we can do is we can help the families figure out how to ask their ohana for support and for help. But if you're supposed to be staying away from each other, you're on your own. And it's like having a colicky baby in the middle of the night. Like it's frightening, and it's isolating, and it's depressing. It's really hard. I know when my own mother was in her last days, somebody said, this would kind of be like Christmas if Mom weren't dying, because we were all together. We were caring for her. We were caring for each other. We were reminiscing about some of the crazy things we'd done in the past. And that's what life is all about. It's not about saying, well, I'm not having joy anymore, so I guess it's time, and I guess I'll just do this. And there's so much of that is just not only wrong, but it's so divisive. You're never going to have a family when everybody's happy with that. And so the people who were supporting the person to say, well, you really wanted mom or dad to die. And, that's not something that's going to leave a legacy of people coming together like it did in my family, where we all helped to care for mom in her last days. And it's something that's so rich and so beautiful that even 30 years later, we still hold on to that gold, and nobody will ever take that away from us. And I think people at a certain level do understand that caring is better than killing. And I use the word killing here because that's really what it is. I was on a task force with a group of physicians who are palliative care physicians about how are we going to respond to legalization of euthanasia in Canada. And I made the statement, I said, well, I'm not sure there are a lot of doctors who are going to have a lot of enthusiasm for killing their patients. And one of the people who was a proponent of MAID said to me, now, don't use inflammatory language. And I'm thinking to myself, I said, well, I'm willing to play nice in the sandbox here, but tell me what I should be saying. And the person said, well, you could say take the life of the patient. So I'm not allowed to say killing. I'm supposed to say take the life. But I personally don't see a whole lot difference between those things, other than that you've sanitized the language and you're obscuring what's really happening. So I think that caring is a lot better for all of us than killing is. And I think because we know that, some part of us knows that, whether it's only subconscious. But the other thing that we miss is we don't get what I call a lot of people will call the death narratives. So when somebody dies, like when my mom passed away, there were some really beautiful moments in that. It was hard. She was only 61 years old. She was younger than I am now. She'd had cancer for 14 years, and there were at the end of her life, well, all through her life, but at the end of her life, there were some really beautiful moments and some funny ones too, that we could share with people who would say, well, what was it like? How was it? And we say, well, we were all there, and my brother was getting married 6 weeks later, and he and his fiance offered to get married in mom's bedroom. And she said, no, honey, I want you to have only happy memories of your wedding day. And we all were just, destroyed. And then other things that happened. And there were some beautiful moments that were there that we could share. And it helps the people to tell the narrative, and it helps our society and our community to hear those narratives. It takes some of that sting away from death, that if this family can have some beautiful moments at the end of their mother's life, maybe I can too. Maybe we can. Maybe they'll come alongside and help me. But if people are not wanting to share those things, they not only cheat themselves out of having that support and that love, but they impoverish all of us. Our whole society doesn't have these beautiful moments of what it's like to be there with people. One of my friends, her mother just passed away, and a really poignant moment for them was when she was slipping away, and the father, I think they'd been married 68 years or something, and been missionaries in Asia, and just amazing people. And the father he'd been caring for her after a stroke for quite a few years, but even into their 90s. And he picked her up and just kissed her and said, I love you. You're more beautiful to me than the day that I married you. Oh my gosh, it's making me choke up, and I wasn't even there. But that's what we need. That's what our culture needs. We need to have, instead of this little plastic idea of, well, you have to be so beautiful, you have to be so talented, and all of the social media stuff where you only put your best things on there, and only the happy stuff, and only the things where you're successful in the creative things that you try. All of those things. What are we teaching our children? What are they learning? That it's only when you're perfect that we want to see things from you. No, we want to get dirty and close and loving and bloody and all these other things that we need to. That's how we care for each other. And that's what Jesus did. That's what Jesus did. That's what his followers have done. There are still ways that we can care. Who is it in your community who's living alone, who could use a phone call, who could use some kind of a card that you send in the mail? We serve this God who with our wildest dreams of beauty and love and caring for each other and compassion and Emmanuel, they're simply not wild enough. He wants to be right there with us. And he's no person's debtor. When we do that, he shows up. That's just all there is to it. Even when it's hard, and even when you don't necessarily feel it in that moment, he makes his presence known to you in his own time, in his own way. And he promises us that we don't even offer a cup of cold water in his name without having a reward, much less caring for someone, coming alongside someone. And that is, you can't outgive him. One image that I've used before is there's a nettles, stinging nettles. And some people think they have some medicinal properties and make tea and other things out of them. But the interesting thing about a nettle is that if you just brush up against it, it has all these little hypodermic needle-like projections on the stem and the leaves, and it knocks the top off of those, and it injects this really irritating chemical into your system. And so if you just brush up against it, it really stings and it's bad. But other than being smart and wearing gloves, but if you actually grab it hard, then you just crush those and you don't get the same sting as if you just brush up against it. And I think being with people who are suffering or at the end of their life or in any difficult circumstances, it's a bit like that. If you stand out on the outskirts and you just brush up against it, you're imagining what it would be like for you to be in that situation. And you're thinking, oh, this is terrible. Like the medical student who's watching anything for the first time and like, whoa, I'm going to faint, rather than being the person who has to do it. And you get your concentration on the other person. And it's easy to do that. And I think it's a little bit like this when we come alongside, that if we just brush up against it, it's like, oh, this is so horrible, I don't want to go there. But if you get in there and crush it, as the young people like to say, then you get the richness that's there, and you don't have the same sting. It's completely opposite, and just strange to think about, but it does happen that way. And people that have done this would say, man, I wouldn't have chosen it, but it's been one of the most important things in my life. It's been that gold.
I appreciate what you said. You anticipated one of my questions, which was going to be, after you spoke about this idea of total care and all these different people who can surround someone who is suffering or someone who's nearing the end of their life, somebody who just needs care, and we surround them. But in a time of COVID-19, I think wisdom is part of caring for our neighbors, caring for our family, caring for those who are at risk is, unfortunately, and seems counterintuitive to what you've been saying, is staying distant from them. So your comments about the need to be creative really hit home there, and I find myself sometimes just coming up short in ways to be creative, to really show care, because there's so much of care is it's proximity, and it's embodied, it's being there as a presence with the person. Right. And like you said, even when there's very little you can do physically, just bearing witness, just being present. Can you help us think, are there ways that you in your vocation have had to think through during COVID what that could could be right now?
Yes, I think it's a good thing that it's hard for us to not be there, because uh, Jesus is Emmanuel. He's God with us. He's incarnate. He's got meat on him. That's the word meaning of the word, right? And he's flesh. And so we are created in the image of God, and we want to have that. Like the little boy that said, at night when he said, well, God will be with you, but I want God with skin on him. Of course, that's what we want, and that's a good thing to want that and to miss that. It would be really sad if we could all just be in a virtual world and be contented with that. So I think that's the first place. The other thing would be some of the things that I suggested already, FaceTime, telephone calls. Sometimes it needs to be more intentional in terms of touching base. So if you've got someone that is alone, completely alone, trying to care for a parent who's dying, or the people that I had a lot of concern for were parents of children living with disabilities. Oh my word, in the midst of this, they were used to having outside care helpers and everything, and to be at home with a child, with one or two children with a disability, and nobody around to help you. Well, how could we do that? And I think, one of the things that's not particularly creative, but is useful, is ask, talk to the person, get somebody, a designated person, and say, what would help you? So if it would help you to have maybe not meals delivered in the midst of this, but maybe we could arrange for takeout for you. Is there a way that we can get somebody who's a professional cleaner, who's allowed to come into homes like that, to come in and help clean your house? Can you give us your laundry, and we'll do your laundry for you, and then you leave it for 24 hours in another part of the house, so that that clothing lasts about 20, the virus doesn't last beyond about 24 hours on clothing, or fabric. So we do that. So how do we think about this? One of the things that a family had told me many, many years ago, back when they used notebooks and things instead of doing stuff online, was they kept a notebook, and when anybody would say, well, if there's ever anything you need help with, if there's anything I can do, they had things written down that they could use some help with. And so they said, well, sign up for something. And they said, we were smart enough to realize that we had to put a few duds in there, like mail these letters for us, or buy us some stamps, or, do this, because people wanted to sign up for something, but maybe they hadn't really meant it when they said it. And so I've kind of refined that a little bit by getting somebody from your community to interview the family and say, what would help? So, is it helping with in a normal time, like driving to music lessons or providing meals? And there's all kinds of really interesting apps and websites that you can use that to figure out meals and grocery shopping. Are there ways that we can go to the store for you? Are there other things? What can we do? And then the other piece to it is to make each task very specific and time limited. So let's say it's meals. Then it's a meal every Tuesday night for the month of June. And then you're done. And you can say, the person who's the coordinator can call up and say, well, you did June. How are you feeling about July? Oh, well, that really was not that big a deal. I'll do July. Or I'm going to be away in July. I'll do August, whatever it is. But so it's time limited, so the person doesn't think, I'm signing up to do meals on Tuesday for the next 10 years. Being a good student of the person and the family who needs help, I think is important. We do have a creative God, and I think this is going to sound maybe crazy, but the place of prayer, where you just say, okay, I'm not quite sure how to help here. We need, as a community, to be able to figure out creative ways to help this family, and we need to be not have it perfect before we start. we have very dear friends who lost a child with a genetic illness quite a number of years ago now. But they said that when people would come, that even if they did kind of stick their foot in it every now and then, it was way better to see them than people who just didn't show up and who were silent. Like your mistakes are easier than your silence. And I think that's true. Anybody who's been up with a baby crying in the middle of the night knows what it feels like to have a hand around, an arm around your shoulder or whatever. And it's the same anytime when we're in those places where we're being stretched and we're at the place where we don't think that we can handle it.
The COVID-19 crisis is a time of a lot of suffering, and there have been wise measures, I think, put in place by government, by the medical authorities to try to slow the spread, to try to control the spread of COVID-19, and that's good. But at the same time, those social distancing measures, as you've been talking, that they themselves have caused a lot of hardship, a lot of suffering, especially for those who are already suffering, already lonely, already at risk. But actually for others who weren't, there's been a lot of, there's a lot of layers to what's going on right now. But sometimes a time of crisis in society can really pinpoint things. It can be a time when, as a society, we can really learn. It can focus in on things that ought to inform us for the rest of, once we're done the pandemic, once these measures are gone. Are there one or two things you think that have really come under the microscope in this time of COVID-19 that if from your perspective as a palliative care physician, you would love it if our society would take this away as a learning from this time?
Yes, I think there are a couple of them. One is that maybe we've lost a little bit of our illusion of control, that a lot of what has driven this idea of euthanasia and hastening death has been, well, I've always been in control of everything else. It isn't about symptom management. Most of the people that have euthanasia are not having symptoms, terrible symptoms at the time. It has to do with existential issues 95% of the time, about not being able to do the things that gave them pleasure, not being in control, all of those other kinds of things. The symptom management is usually not the issue, although that's the way it's sold to the general public. So this idea that somehow we understand how little control we really do have in our lives, it's kind of what people call a first world problem, because if you're living as a subsistence farmer in sub-Saharan Africa, you realize you don't have very much control in your life. There are all kinds of other folks who are living in war zones who realize that they don't have a lot of control in their lives. There are people who are living in horrible slums who it just may be, that a fire comes through, or drug lords, or whatever is happening. They don't have an illusion of control like we have. And so we get we feel like, well, we should be able to control everything about our lives. And I just hope that we can come to the place where, instead of fearing that lack of control, we can kind of lean into it a little bit more and say, well, it's kind of interesting. I didn't have the kind of control I did. I mean, anybody who, before children and after children, you really have an understanding about how little control you have with somebody who's 2, because you thought, we're going to have so much fun. We'll have art days and we'll do all these other things. Like, I know. So I think God maybe is chuckling a little bit with us about some of this wake up that we've had. Like, man, I'm not in as much control as I thought I was. And I hope we can be a little more lighthearted about it and go with the flow a little bit more, and not feel like we have to be in control of everything, that we can allow ourselves some more Sabbath, some more leisure, to do things more slowly. That type of thing, I think, would be good. The other thing is, I attended a wedding on Saturday of one of our medical students, and it was by YouTube. And I commend this couple so heartily for following all the rules and for not letting what they couldn't have ruin what they do have. I totally commend them. They had over 200 groups watching on YouTube, but when they got married, the church, the sanctuary of the church had no chairs in it. The pastor stood at the front. Their brothers sort of welcomed people a little, and then they stood to the side. The groom brought his mother in, and she stood to the side. I think his father has passed away. The mother of the bride walked in by herself and stood to the side. And then the doors opened, and the bride stood there in all her beauty with her father. And, you know, the music was being played by someone who was remote. They had beautiful flower arrangements and all of that. She walked down, and I was devastated. I was so surprised how it hit me, how sad I was about this, that this beautiful young couple, you know, this is something a little girl dreams of her whole life, is this wedding day where she walks down the aisle and she sees the faces of all these people who love her and who care for her, and the community is there, and her husband is standing there just smiling, and we're all looking at him and just beaming. There's this sense in the room of this joy that we have of being together as a community. And I was just blown away by how painful I found it to watch this couple go through this alone. You know, it's still just choking me up just thinking about, wow, our communities are so important. Being together and celebrating those things, being together and caring for each other when it's hard, but those celebrations, we need to get over this idea that it's not important, that Zoom church is just as good as regular church. It's not. You know, we need to be there so we can hug people and they can see our faces, and that empty church. And it was a beautiful wedding. They honored God. I'm not saying anything against it, but it just really just boom, just smacked me in a way that I wasn't prepared for, because I thought, oh, well, they're being smart. They're doing this right, you know, and all of this. And then she walks in this empty room. It was, oh my gosh, what we have lost with our community not being there, and not just being there to pray and cheer them on. And of course we were all watching and sending messages on the side and doing that, but I don't know. I think we need to remember that true gold of our community and nurture it and get in there and be part of it. Don't be a spectator. Find the people in your neighborhood, find the people, even if you can't have to do it online now, or sending a real letter in the mail, heaven help us, you know, doing some of those things. Just figure out creative ways to care for each other. I know there's a story about a family that separated on each side of the border, because the dad, I think, is in Canada and the mom's in the US, and they've got a little one. Every night he reads the bedtime story on FaceTime. So are there ways that we can do things like that? But boy, oh boy, it's not the same. And I think when the writer to the Hebrews said, you know, don't give up meeting together, that this is bringing that home. We need to not do that. We need to spur one another on to love and good deeds. And there's no substitute for being there with skin on. And I think those are the two big things I've taken away from this, is just relinquishing some of my illusion of control, that we all could do that. and really thanking God and being grateful for and blessing and participating in our communities.
That's a very good word. Let's hope this time of COVID and pray this time of COVID and the required and necessary social distance just creates in us a greater desire to be together once again.
As some things do become virtual and stay virtual, and that not all of it's bad, that those things could happen, and maybe more people can be seen if we're doing some of those things, and some of the little quick checks and other things like that can do that. But as Christians, if everything that's happening for a senior in our midst is happening in a virtual way, then maybe we need to be very intentional about being the people that make the visits in person, that bring the cookies, that do those other things that maybe our society isn't going to be able to go back to the way that it was, and that may not be all bad, but we have the opportunity to bring that precious spikenard, that aroma of Christ, that radical presence into the lives of people who will not be able to deny the presence of Jesus. And that's a gift we have, to be those people, to be his hands and feet, to be his ambassadors, is something that is precious to us, and a really important part of that gold refined by fire.